Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Beacon Life Church members. This Sunday morning, I bless the Lord for getting this opportunity to speak to you again. It's been a while, but we thank God that He has kept us and we are able to communicate and share through this medium. Welcome. Now, for a while now, I have put out material on attitude. We've also recorded something jointly with the Pastor Mike on attitude, and my heart is still impressed to continue speaking to you on this topic. This topic has interested me for one reason that I like to be practical in my teachings. I like to be practical in my exhortation by describing what real life is, what I go through, and what I think I can share with a brother or a sister on the practicalities of life. So I'm still continuing on the topic of attitude. I'm still speaking of attitude, and today I'm going to look at one character in the Bible, and today's character is Joseph. Most of us are familiar with the story of Joseph. We know that Joseph was born of Jacob. He was the 11th born son of Jacob, and his brothers sold him off into slavery into Egypt. Having known this, we know that what gave Joseph problems was the kind of dreams that God gave him. So Joseph's dreams were divinely granted by God. They were not his own creation, they were not fantasy, but they were dreams that were given to him by God. And the dreams were plain, they were not complicated that needed any kind of interpretation or decoding, but they were plain and clear, and the subjects in the dream were plain and clear, and for this reason it never took struggle on the part of their brothers or their parents to understand the content of Joseph's dream. But these two main dreams that Joseph had landed him into trouble with his siblings. His siblings got envious and, driven with envy, sold him into slavery into Egypt. So we see that Joseph was sold to Egypt when his father had sent him to get to know the state of affairs of his brothers who were watching over the flock. They saw him coming and they made up their mind that here comes the dreamer. Let us do away with him. Let us kill him. In their understanding, driven by envy, was that if they kill Joseph, then they would do away with Joseph's dream, or Joseph's dream will never come to pass, because he was the main character in his dreams, and what was displayed in his dreams is that his father, his mother, and his 11 siblings would bow before him. So fast forward, we see Joseph sold to Egypt. Once he's sold to Egypt, he finds his way. The first trading landed him into the house of Potiphar, who was Pharaoh's captain to Pharaoh's guards. He's a senior person within the royalty. He's a senior official, but Joseph comes in as a slave. And what we see is that the Bible says in Genesis 39:2 that God was with Joseph. That means that even though his brothers had an evil plan, God's hand on Joseph never got weakened, and God never became slack in terms of protecting Joseph and seeing to it that Joseph's dream that he had granted earlier would come to pass. So what do we see? Genesis 39:2 says that God was with Joseph. That means even by the time bargains were being done between the Ishmaelites and Potiphar, or Potiphar's agents who were buying slaves, as they were bidding and putting a price on Joseph's head, God was in it. God was with him. Once he was sold into Potiphar's house, the Lord saw to it that Joseph prospered in Potiphar's house to a point where everything was delegated to him. He became the head of all the affairs. He ran all the businesses of Potiphar, and Potiphar had so much trust in him that the Bible says that he cared not much about all of his businesses, except he relied on Joseph to run everything. But then in the process, comes out Potiphar's wife. So we see Joseph is now a slave in Potiphar's house. God's favor has been with him, and he is risen to the top. He is running the affairs of the house, and the privileges that he has in this house, except for being a slave, he has all the privileges that an Egyptian would have, courtesy of God's power and God's favor being with him. But then comes Potiphar's wife, and the Bible says that Potiphar's wife laid eyes on Joseph. Then she started putting a lot of pressure on Joseph so that Joseph would get intimate with her. The Bible says that she cast her eyes upon Joseph. And throughout the period in which Joseph served in Potiphar's house, she continuously sought opportunity to get intimate with Joseph. But Joseph, having known God in his life and having been shown a dream earlier in his life, he knew that God had a purpose for his life, and he could not consent to such a deal with Potiphar's wife. Now, Joseph is a youth, he's a slave. That means he didn't have the freedom and liberty to choose a partner. If he wanted to get into a marriage arrangement, it would not be possible, because here he was sold into slavery, and intimacy was something ruled out in his life at this moment. So the devil comes with a scheme and an opportunity, showing him, this is your time, this is your chance. Look at you. You're young, you've been denied this opportunity, but it has come through another door. Seize it, make use of it. But Joseph, having known God, he didn't bow to the pressure of Potiphar's wife. Then Potiphar's wife makes a scandal out of this, and then Joseph now moves from being a slave into a prisoner. So it's a situation moving from bad to worse. But you see, God is still with him. The hand of God is still upon him. When we look at what is recorded in the Bible, we do not see any point where Joseph becomes bitter, although circumstances have been sort of against him from the time his siblings sold him. He's become a slave, having had a dream that he was looking forward to be fulfilled in his lifetime. He's now a slave. When God has put him in this place, God has shown him favor in the house of Potiphar, but still problems have not ceased, because what looked like an opportunity that the devil presented to him, having known who God is, he did not seize that opportunity. Potiphar's wife has scandalized this and is now thrown into prison. Some scholars say that Potiphar's wife still followed Joseph in prison and gave him an opportunity that would secure him release from prison if he would accept the deal of Potiphar's wife being intimate with him. So look at the offer that Joseph has. At one point he was controlling Potiphar's business, and this time he was controlling everything, including finances in Joseph's house, in Potiphar's house, and this gave him the opportunity to indulge and cover up everything wicked that they could do with Potiphar's wife. But having known God, he did not go that direction, but he chose to go the hard direction of facing prison, falsely accused, and God's hand followed him into prison. In prison, he received all the favor that God had for him, and even in prison, he rose up. At a point in time, 2 years before his release, the gift of interpreting dreams came alive again into Joseph's life. I want to believe that during the period, the number of years he was in prison, God must have showed him a number of things through dreams or through any other ways that God uses to communicate to us, that strengthened him and gave him hope, gave him the ability to stand. 2 years before his release, he interpreted dreams that saw Pharaoh's butler retain back his post, and the other worker who was in Pharaoh's house, the dream was correctly interpreted that he would be hanged, and he was hanged. The butler, Pharaoh's butler with whom he was in prison, he sought his help and told him, when you go out back into Pharaoh's court, please remember me. But he forgot about Joseph. Through this, Joseph never got bitter. We don't see any evidence of Joseph being bitter or taking offense. or living under offense. Although circumstances have betrayed him, his siblings have betrayed him, his close confidants have betrayed him, his boss's wife has betrayed him, but he's remained focused, he's remained loyal to who God is in his life, and he is appreciative of what God is doing, and that is why living a life of temporary convenience in sin was not an option, was not a choice he could take, but he chose the hard way that God made available for him. Now, the Bible says that Joseph appeared before Pharaoh at the age of 30. That is 13 years of both slavery and being in prison. He was sold at 17, and he secured his liberty being brought to interpret Pharaoh's dreams at the age of 30. 13 grueling continuous years. But at the end of 13 years, Joseph had a choice. Joseph had a choice to look at his past and blame his past and become hopeless, deny himself hope. Joseph had a choice to be bitter with his siblings. Joseph had a choice to be bitter with his parents for having sent him to the wilderness where he met his predicament. Joseph had a choice to be bitter with Potiphar. Joseph had a choice to be bitter with Potiphar's wife who lied about him. And Joseph also had a choice to be bitter with God and say, Lord, even if you're with me, why am I going through all these things? But you don't see evidence of that. That means Joseph had an attitude of seeing God at work. He chose to see God's hand at work instead of seeing the enemy or the devil's hand at work. And this is what I want to encourage you to have, the kind of thinking and the kind of view of life that Joseph had. So when Joseph comes out of prison, he goes all the way into being a prime minister in the land of Egypt. So when he becomes a prime minister in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh cedes to him all administrative power within the whole land, and he has access to everything except the throne. That means he's the second most powerful person in Egypt now. So the dream is becoming a reality. The dream is coming to fulfillment. What he saw at the age of 17 or thereabout is now being fulfilled. And God has been at work in his life from birth, even up to the age when he's 30, that now he has obtained liberty. He has obtained a plum job within Pharaoh's royalty, and he's moved upwards. So he's second in command. He has all the privileges of life. And during this time, one thing we don't see in Joseph is a life that is full of offense. Joseph does not go the direction of self-pity. Joseph had all the opportunities to live under self-pity. One thing I've learned about self-pity is that God has given our souls ability to be pitiful. But pity is a thing that we are not supposed to apply to ourselves, but we are supposed to apply it to other people whom we pity. So when we turn to pity ourselves, it's a tragedy that we have moved into selfishness. What we are supposed to apply to others, we are applying to ourselves. And seeing life through the lens of self-pity is a tragedy to a Christian, and this is not God's will for us. The temptation to always look at circumstances and pity ourselves and throw our hands in the air and give up and quit and say things are not working will always present themselves. Let's look at Acts 24:16. Acts 24:16, Paul says something that really is in line with what I'm speaking today. He says, "Herein I do exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward man." So we see that what Paul is explaining, that in his conscience, he makes sure that his conscience is clear and he does not carry offense towards man or towards God. Joseph had opportunity to have offense against his brothers, against his parents, like I said, against his employer, and against fellow prisoners who betrayed him and disappointed him, who didn't keep their word, who didn't keep their promise. But he also had an opportunity to have or carry offense against God. I've met Christians who carry offense against God and say, why did God allow this to happen? And if God is really caring, why am I going through this, and this? I want to tell you that Even if today you are going through something similar to what Joseph was going through, or you think that what you are going through is worse than what Joseph faced during the 13 years of slavery and serving in prison, you have a choice to carry offense and have a conscience that has offense towards man and God and towards both man and God. But if you will exercise yourself in this thing that your conscience will be void of offense towards man and God, then you've opened the door to see God at work, to look at your circumstances and be full of praise and thanks, because in as much as what is happening in your life, you are able to see God at work. Now, when you're able to see God at work, you will not live under self-pity, you will not wait for life to start happening, but every circumstance will be a new normal to you. When you always have your life as normal, irrespective of what is happening, then you will bring yourself into a state of pursuing what God has for you. God's will for you does not slumber. God's will for you does not have interludes. God's will for you does not have seasonality. You will have to go through times and occasions and seasons, but God does not slow down, or God does not fasten his pace, but God has already counted and numbered your days before you're born. So everything that is happening to you is not strange to God, is not a surprise to him, and his work is not hindered by what is happening to you. But what you need to do is to look closely and see the hand of God at work. For this reason, then, I want to call you today into a place. I want to call you out of waiting for Corona to end and define a new normal in your life, so that you will not be in a state of waiting, but you will be in a state of watching God work and work together with God, so that then you can do and let God do in your life what he did in the life of Joseph. What he did in the life of Joseph was that he walked with Joseph and showed Joseph things to come, and Joseph ended up having a disruptive change, bringing a disruptive change into the government of Egypt. We know what disruptive change is. Disruptive innovation are things I can describe. All of us know. You know what printing press did to revolutionize the way people live in the world. When telephones came, changed total way of living. Those were the landlines. After the landlines, we have mobile telephony coming into place, totally revolutionized lives. We have the internet, has totally revolutionized lives. And now we have Internet of Things and many, many things. But those who bring disruptive changes are not people who wait for dark clouds to pass before they start innovating, but they are continuously working, they are continuously walking. They have a fortitude to look forward and to see good in what the world, in what the media, in what is awash in the social life called dark times or dark seasons or dark times or dark periods. So I want to say that the season of Corona is here, but it should not define you. You should not stop and wait for Corona to be over. I want you to define this as your new normal, so that you count that your life is continuing. Your life is continuing, and you are watching the hand of God. You are waiting upon God. You are seeing what God is doing, so that you take note and obey and follow instructions, so that what God has for you can become a manifestation in your life. Then you will be able to bring disruptive change like Joseph brought in the land of Egypt. Joseph brought the idea of strategic grain reserve, which is something that even present governments the world over are using to make sure that their populations have food security. Joseph brought the idea of taxation. Joseph brought the idea of specialization within the land of Egypt. If you study the book of Genesis and zero in into the changes that Joseph brought in the land of Egypt, were so dramatic. But that is not the end of what we see in Joseph's attitude towards his circumstances, his ability to discern what God was doing with him, in his life, through him. Because when the famine season came, his brothers came back in his life. He saw them and he knew them. They saw Joseph, they didn't know who Joseph was. Joseph never went back into a state of bitterness, but with compassion he received them. Even when he was overwhelmed with love, he had to go privately and cry on the side. But when the time came for him to reveal himself to his brothers, he chased away all the Egyptians who were in the room and poured out his heart to his brothers in a way that is so overwhelming. He had a choice to talk down and run down his brothers before the Egyptians and tell them everything and show them how God has been with him anyway. You tried this and you failed, and now it's me on top of things. I'm the one who is running things in this land. I'm the one who has the key to food and all this. Joseph did not take that route. That means the seed of bitterness was never planted in him. And even if it was planted, it never grew to full fruition. It died off. Joseph had a heart towards his brothers that was consistent. And this is seen at the end of it, that with all this having happened, he secured a place for his father. He secured a place for his brothers. He secured a place for the entire family and lineage in the land of Goshen. And God saw to it that Goshen remained prosperous. Goshen never faced drought, and their flock multiplied, their wealth increased, and their posterity was kept. But one thing I pick out in Joseph's words when he was revealing himself to his brothers, he said, God brought me ahead of you that I may preserve yours and my posterity. It reveals to you what Joseph has been seeing for the number of years he's been in prison, out of prison into governance, that it is God who brought him to Egypt, that God had a purpose. And the purpose of God was that he should secure the posterity of the house of Jacob. Now, he could have lost all of that. He could have frustrated the hand of God by choosing to be bitter, choosing to be offended, choosing to have a conscience that is clouded by past events. Psychology teaches us that your upbringing will affect how you behave and how your life turns out. To an extent, that is true. So psychology will tell you that if you come from a family that is broken, if you come from a family that had certain features, then there's an expectation of certain things to happen in your life. If you never had a father, if you never had a mother, you were brought up with a foster mother, then you expect your life to have an incompleteness because of things that happened in your childhood. And you can choose to carry those as baggage in your life. You can choose to be offended against people who never did their part when you are growing up or when you're being brought up, or even in your present life when people who betray you. Never be surprised as a child of God that you will come across or you'll meet people who are not faithful. You will meet people whose minds are clouded with darkness, people who think vile, and people who do things opposite the will of God. So never get into offense when you meet. God has not promised you that you will never meet fallen people. So when you meet these people, you have a choice to go into a life of offense or to clear your conscience and see God at work. Brings me back to the problem I have with psychology, that your upbringing will determine how your life turns out. To an extent, that is true, but if it remains true, then it leaves you with a victim mentality. You will always view yourself to be a victim of your childhood. You will view yourself as a victim of your upbringing, or you will view yourself as a victim of the people who have wronged you. But this is not what God is saying that your life should be. God is saying that He is the Alpha and the Omega in your life. He is the beginning and the end. And He wants you to look at His hand at work. He wants you to listen to His Spirit giving you instructions and leading you in the way that you should go, so that God will make your life to be continuously normal. You will see your life as normal. Things change, you define a new normal in your life. So you will not wait for the good old days to come back. You will not wait for Corona to get over with so that you can start your life a normal again. Just define a new normal and continue. The children of Israel, when they left Egypt, they kept on waiting for the old Egyptian experience, and it kept them in the desert 40 years. Do not wait for the old Egyptian experience to be restored so that you can restart and continue your life again. You had a life before Corona came. Right now, so many things are happening. The government has brought in so many restrictions, but just define a new normal for yourself, having known that God does not change. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And therefore, I want to encourage you that your life should not change. You should not restrict your dreaming. You should not cast away the things that God has shown you in the past that ought to happen in your life, but you should remain in hot pursuit of God's will for your life. You should be as constant as God is. You should demonstrate forth the character of God in your life, and you should demonstrate Christ being in you. The Bible says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So I want to tell you, this is my message to you today. Do not wait to exhale. Keep breathing. Keep moving. Change the parameters. Define a new normal. Call your life today normal and continue. Keep on doing what you know to do. Do it at your best, patiently, full of joy, knowing that the hand of God is constantly at work. The Bible says that God does not slumber. So God has not slept on you. God has not forgotten you. He is at work in your life. And if you hear Him well, then you will be an agent of disruptive change. You'll be an agent of disruptive innovation. You will fit into new things that are coming. You will fit into the shift that is now happening. The way things were done last year will not be the same. They'll be done this year, and next year they'll be different. But if you want to fit into this and be an agent of change, you have to look at the hands of God and see that He is constant. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. With those few words of exhortation, my brothers and sisters, thank you very much for giving me a few minutes to listen to me. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord increase you. May the Lord show you the path that you should go. May what people call dark clouds mean nothing to you, but may you see the bright light that Christ is shining in your life every day. Beacon Life Church, we are shining the light of Christ all over the world. Amen.